And today we are celebrating with our first virtual Black History Month lecture with Adonis Bozeman and his grandfather, Mr. Clarence Bozeman. Now, I know just from our conversation getting this thing started, I know a lot of you are already familiar with Mr. Bozeman, both Mr. Bozemans, but I had a chance to speak with Adonis and Mr. Clarence earlier this week. And when I tell you I was inspired, found out that Mr. Clarence Bozeman and I are from the same hometown, Gaston, Alabama. But most importantly, he just shared a history lesson with me. You know, he shared a lot about what's going on or what has gone on in my city. He shared a lot about what has gone on in Alabama. And I just got really excited about today. I think the story he's going to share with you all will inspire you. I know that you're already excited, so I won't take a lot of time. Dr. Ken Thomas is actually going to do the formal introduction, but I do want to say thank you to Adonis Bozeman and Mr. Clarence Bozeman for being here. I reached out to Adonis and I said, I need your help, Adonis. I want to do this event. He jumped right on it. He didn't hesitate. And if you know Adonis, he's always happy, energetic, and just smiling. And I found out that he got that from Mr. Clarence Bozeman. In my conversation with him, I found out exactly where Adonis gets his personality. So this is going to be an exciting event. Before we let Dr. Thomas, introduce our speakers, I want to let Matt Rogers, our president, just say a couple words. We'll transition into an introduction from Dr. Thomas. And I do want to remind you all that your mics are muted, and that's just so that our featured speakers will have a chance to talk uninterrupted. So I hope you all will enjoy it. I know you will all enjoy it. And Mr. Rogers, if you want to give us a few words, we'll get started.
Thank you, Dean Mathis, and what a privilege and a pleasure to be with many of you this morning. I look down and I see that we have 62 participants this morning that are currently on the call, and that number is going up as we speak. But greetings to everyone all over the country. I've been on several Zooms over the last year, and I can tell you I've never been on a Zoom where we've had more states and cities represented, from Cleveland to Arizona and in between. And so what an honor it is to be with you today, and what an honor it is to have Mr. Bozeman and Adonis back with us. Mr. Bozeman has been with us before and visited with me and been in Enterprise, and Adonis was here for not a long enough period of time, I will say that. We certainly would have loved to had him stay longer, but in the meantime, Adonis was an inspiration to many and made a difference. We all want to make a difference. And so to Adonis, to your mom and sisters and granddad, all of you should be very proud of the way Adonis, the job that he did here, the way he conducted himself here, the way he led, and the way that he impacted others. You want to surround yourself with people that make you better. And I can say that every time I was in Adonis's presence, he made me feel better about myself. And that to me is what it's all about. And that's leadership. And I know we're going to hear that today from your presentation. I've had a chance to meet Mr. Bozeman. I had a chance to speak to Mr. Bozeman back in the summer. It doesn't seem like that long ago. And I can tell you, once you start listening to him, you will be totally captivated and you will learn a lot. From one fellow history teacher to another, I look forward to today's presentation and look forward to hearing from both of these gentlemen. And thank you for joining us. Enterprise State, we want to be a beacon of hope and a beacon of positivity in our community, and it starts with people. And we've got fantastic people here, and we certainly have that on the call today. So thank you, Mr. Bozeman and Adonis, and to the Bozeman family, those that are joining us, our guests. You are now family, whether you realize it or not. We welcome you and look forward to hearing from you today as well. Dr. Thomas, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, President Rogers. We're glad you guys are here. Hold on one second. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We're pleased to have Clarence Bozeman and Adonis Bozeman as honored guests to celebrate Black History Month with us. Adonis Bozeman joined the Croft Institute for International Studies at the University of Mississippi as a coordinator of admissions and recruitment in July 2020. In this role, Adonis is responsible for recruiting, processing, and managing all prospective students into Croft. He also oversees the Croft Ambassadors. Mr. Bozeman is the first full-time African-American to join the Croft Institute. Prior to joining the Croft Institute, Adonis worked at Enterprise State Community College as a recruiter and was instrumental in a continuous increase in enrollment for the institution. Prior to his work at ESCC, Adonis worked at Auburn University at Montgomery, and in 2015, brought in one of the largest freshman classes in AUM's history. He received his Bachelor of Science in History with the double minor in Music and Theater from the University of West Alabama. He is a native of Aliceville, Alabama. Clarence Bozeman, born in 1940, was the driver of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He experienced many tribulations during the late 1950s. When Bozeman arrived at his job interview, he was stunned to see that Dr. King was his interviewer. Mr. Bozeman was hired as Dr. King's driver and was paid $6 a week for chauffeuring. When he would drive Dr. King around, he would sometimes make $8 to $10. When driving Dr. King, Clarence had experienced many added difficulties and threats. At one point, people even abused the car he was driving, which was actually Dr. King's car. Even though King was frustrated by such events, he still kept his cool and allowed Clarence to keep his job as his driver. Mr. Bozeman earned his bachelor's degree from Alabama State University in American History and Social Studies, a master's degree in educational administration from Fordham University, and an educational specialist degree from Cleveland State University. Mr. Bozeman was recently awarded the honorary doctorate degree from Wilberforce University. The Bozeman have a rich history to share. Let us all remember that Black history is American history. And now, welcome to Clarence and Adonis Bozeman.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Thomas, for that kind and gracious introduction. I missed our conversation the last time I was in your office. You and I solved the world problems, and we must get back to that again as soon as possible. So again, thank you so much for that kind and gracious introduction. And to President Rogers, my friend, we did speak on the phone, and we too solved a lot of problems, and that was at the edge of the pandemic. And thank you for your vision, sir, for what you have established for Enterprise Community College. Thank you for your excellent leadership, because you're going through some unsettling times. So keep focused, and I'm sure that Enterprise will benefit. And to the Diversity Committee, I want to thank you for reaching out to us just briefly to understand the culture and the contributions of African Americans throughout this country and throughout this world. It's going to take forums like this for us to continue to understand what is necessary for America to remove all vestiges of racism from its culture. And to Dean Mathis, I thank you for the invitation, and it's been a great pleasure to talk to you. I thank you for your communications too, to Adonis and myself. You constantly on every aspect of organizing and making sure all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed. So I thank you for your hard work, and I do hope that in some time in the very near future that we can celebrate another event. It doesn't necessarily have to be Black History. And to all of you who are in the audience, who have taken the time out just to share this occasion with us, we're grateful for your presence this morning. And as we celebrate Black History Month, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, founder of Black History week in 1926. And then 50 years later, 1976, we established Black History Month. And as Dean Masters said, when I grew up in Gadsden, I never had the privilege of having white friends. I never saw a Black policeman. I never saw a Black postal worker, Black fireman, Black lawyer, simply because the laws of segregation were rigidly enforced. Early, a few years ago, I was returning from a high school reunion at Gadsden. I stopped at the Cracker Barrel up near Cullman, Alabama on 65 North. And it was on a Sunday. And as I was standing in line waiting to be seated, a white lady came up to me and said, "Am I in front of you or are you in front of me, sir?" I said, "Well, it doesn't matter because I'm not in a hurry." So she called her husband, who happened to be on a walker. And she was seated before I was. At the end of my meal, when I asked for my bill, when I asked for my receipt, the waitress says, "Your dinner has been paid." And I said, "Well, who paid for my dinner? I don't know anybody here in Cullman." She said, "The lady whose husband was on the walker paid your bill." And I went to my car and I began to cry. I cried because I had just received an unsolicited act of kindness from a white lady. I know that that's the new Alabama. But let me tell you about the old Alabama, where I grew up. And I'm talking about the changes that you and I have seen up until this present moment. But I want to zero in on some of the heroes who manifested that change, particularly Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But more than that, I want to zero in on his suffering, on the things that he had to go through in order for him to move society in a more positive way. I recently read a study that said that most civil rights icons, most civil rights heroes suffer from post-traumatic stress syndrome. They suffered physically, they suffered emotionally, and they suffered psychologically. Let me tell you about the suffering of Dr. King. Dr. King was born January the 15th, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. Had he lived today, he would have been 92 years of age. He graduated from Booker T. Washington High School in 1948. He was an ordained minister in 1948. Graduated from Morehouse College. Graduated from Crozier Theological Seminary with a Bachelor of Divinity. Later, he received his PhD in systemic theology from Boston University. He became the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in 1954. Dr. King led the Montgomery bus boycott starting December of 1955. And in that role, he was persecuted time after time. He delivered more than 400 sermons and lectures throughout his short life. But he was arrested over 27 times in his life. One of the most emotional arrests that was made of Dr. King was in October of 1960. He had just moved from Montgomery to Atlanta, and he was stopped by a traffic policeman and for driving 25 miles an hour in a 20-mile zone. He's taken to jail. And after his trial, he was sentenced to 4 months in prison for driving with Alabama license in Georgia, 2 months after he had moved from Montgomery. On October the 26th, 1960, Dr. King was in shackles, waiting to be transferred up to solitary confinement. And while he was waiting, he asked if he could write a letter to his wife, Mrs. King. Now, this letter preceded the famous Birmingham letter by 3 years. And as Dr. King was in shackles with one hand shackled to his knee, he was writing a letter to his wife, Coretta. Let me share with you, please, the letter that is very powerful about the suffering of Dr. King. He says to his wife, "Hello, darling. Today I find myself a long way from you and the children. I know this whole experience is very difficult for you to adjust to, especially in your condition of pregnancy. But as I said to you yesterday, this is the cross that we must bear for the freedom of our people. I have the faith to believe that this excessive suffering that is now coming to our family will in some little way serve to make Atlanta a better city, make Georgia a better state, and America a better country. Just how, I do not know, but I have faith to believe that it will. And if I'm correct, then our suffering is not in vain." And I understand, Dr. King goes on, I understand that everybody, white and colored, can have visitors this coming Sunday. And I hope that you can find some way to come down. Also ask Wyatt T. Walker to come with you. There are some very urgent things that I will need to talk to him about. And I want you to please bring the following books to me: Stride Toward Freedom, Paul Tillich Systematic Theology, Volume 1 and 2, George Buttrick, The Parables of Jesus, E.S. Jones, Mahatma Gandhi. Bring my Bible, bring me a dictionary, and bring me a reference dictionary called Increasing My Word Power. This book is an old book in a red cover, and it may be in the den upstairs in one of my bags. Also bring the following sermons: What is Man? And the Three Dimensions of Man, The Death of Evil. Give my best regards to all the family. And please ask them not to worry about me. I will adjust whatever comes terms in pain. I hope to see you on Sunday. Eternally yours, Martin. But I remember my freshman year when I was asked to come to the dean's office Saturday morning. And I had no idea what the dean wanted. So when I arrived at his office on a Saturday morning, he said, I have a letter here from the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And they need a driver for the church's station wagon at that time. They want you to go pick up the students at Alabama State, pick up the senior citizens in the community, and I want you to return back here to the parsonage. They want you to return back here to the church's parsonage and pick up Mrs. King and her 2 children. She had 2 children at the time. So then Sunday morning, I went up, I rang the doorbell. Dr. King came to the door and I explained my presence. He invited me in and he sat me down on a small settee adjacent to Mrs. King's piano. And we had an interview and he asked me, did I have valid driver's license? I said, yes, sir. Do you have a clean record? I said, yes, sir. Are you bondable? Yes, sir. He wanted to know my major, my minor at Alabama State. What am I going to do when I finish my degree? And finally, he was satisfied with my answers. And he said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to pick up the senior citizens and the students at Alabama State, take them to church at Dexter, come back and pick up my wife. If you have any problems, Mr. Bozeman, I want you to see me or Dean Robert Nesbitt, chairman of the deacon board. So that first Sunday morning, the first 2 passengers that I carried to Sunday school was Yolanda and Martin, the 3rd. And I had been driving for a few weeks. And each Sunday morning, many times police would follow the station wagon to make sure that I obeyed all the traffic signs. I had an opportunity to drive Mrs. King to her parents' house on some weekends, who lived in Marion, Alabama. I met a father, I met a mother, and I met a brother. They were a strong and independent family. But Dr. King made it clear to me that he did not want me to drive Mrs. King any place after dark. And on some occasions, we had to spend the night at her parents' house in Marion. And we would get up early Monday morning and get back to the campus in Montgomery. Once I was driving Mrs. King to Mobile, Alabama to see her brother who was hospitalized. And as we were driving along in a slow, rainy drizzle, I said, Mrs. King, tell me about the first time that your house was bombed. And she looked away and then she looked at me and she said, well, Mr. Bozeman, said, a friend of mine, Mary Williams and I were sitting in the sunroom. And we heard a thud on the front porch. She said it was an unfamiliar sound. So she, Mary, and 1-month-old Yolanda at the time moved to the rear of the house. And the moment that they moved to the rear and closed the bedroom door, the bomb went off exactly where they were sitting and shattered all of the glass where she and Mrs. Williams were sitting. And as she was telling me this story, tears was running down her cheek. And that was 3 years after the incident. And I remember driving Dr. King on visits throughout Alabama in Talladega, Selma, Greenville, Greensboro, Demopolis, and other small cities in and around Montgomery. Usually this would take place after 11 o'clock services that he had preached and performed at Dexter. And once we were coming back from Sylacauga, and he fell asleep, and he began to be fidgety and mumble in his sleep. And I said, Dr. King, you talking in your sleep? He said, what did I say? What did I say? I said, well, that's between me and the Lord. He chuckled. But I asked him, I said, well, Dr. King, do you ever get tired? And he looked out the window and he said, tired? No. Weary? Yes. And I think that Dr. King was weary and tired because of all the threats that were out on his life at all times. He talks about one of those threats on August the 27th, 1967, in a sermon at the Mount Pisgah Baptist Church in Chicago, Illinois. He said that all day he had spent with the Montgomery Improvement Association. And the meeting had finished about midnight. And just as he got in his house at midnight, the telephone rang. And he picked it up thinking that there was some additional business that needed to be completed from the MIA. He said, but there was a nasty voice on the other end of that phone. It said, boy, we are tired of your mess. And if you're not out of town in the next 3 days, we are going to blow your brains out, blow up your house, and kill your family. And Dr. King says that at one time he was receiving up to 30 to 40 telephone threats every day. He said, but this particular threat disturbed him. He said he tried to get some sleep, but he was unable to do so. He got up and he looked in on his 1-month-old daughter, Yolanda. Then he looked in on his loving wife, Mrs. King. And he said he got up and got a cup of coffee, thinking that the coffee would relieve his anxiety. And then he said he began to pray over that cup of coffee. He said, Lord, I'm discouraged now. He said, Lord, I'm weak and I'm faltering and I'm losing my courage. And it seemed at that moment, as he was saying, I don't want to see my constituents to see me this way. Lord, help me along the way. And he said, as he stared down at that cup of coffee, he heard a voice from the Holy Spirit that said, Martin Luther King Jr., stand up for truth, stand up for justice, and stand up for righteousness. And lo, I'll be with you even until the end of the world. I tell you, I've seen the lightning flash. I've heard the thunder roll. And I've felt sin breakers dashing, trying to conquer my soul. But I heard the voice of Jesus saying, fight on. And he promised never to leave me, never to leave me, never to leave me alone. Ladies and gentlemen, at that moment, the civil rights movement in America and in Alabama received a positive psychological jolt because Dr. King was on the verge of depression because of all those threats. And Dr. King's favorite gospel hymn was Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I'm tired and I'm weak and I'm worn. Through the night, lead me on through the night. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me home. Dr. King preached sermon after sermon on that song because he said it was God's mission. God had depicted his mission of life for that song, and that it depicted his life. If you read Dr. King's books or hear his sermons, read his essays, you will find 4 dominant themes throughout those books and sermons: love, hope, forgiveness, and prophecy. Love, hope, forgiveness, and prophecy. I'm reminded of Dr. King's last sermon on earth, April the 3rd, 1968, at the Mason Temple Church of God in Christ. Dr. King said, you know, several years ago, I was in New York City autographing my first book. And as he was autographing the book, a lady came up to him and said, "Are you Martin Luther King?" He said, "Yes," but he was writing. And this lady stabbed him with a letter opener, Mrs. Izola Curry. He was rushed to Harlem Hospital. He said it was a dark day for him, suffering. He said the letter opener was at the tip of his aorta. And it came out in the New York Times the next day that if Dr. King had merely sneezed, he would have died because his aorta would have been punctured and he would have drowned in his own blood. And that's the end of it. He received a lot of letters. He said he received letters and telegrams from the president, the vice president, the governor of New York. He said, but there was one letter that he did receive that he will always remember. And it was a letter that came from a little girl who was a student at White Plains High School in White Plains, New York. And it said, "Dear Dr. King, I'm a 9th grade student at the White Plains High School." And she said, "While it should not matter, I would like to mention that I am a white girl. And I read in the paper about your misfortunes and about your suffering. And I read that if you had sneezed, you would have died. And I'm simply writing to you to say this day that I'm happy that you didn't sneeze." And Dr. King goes on and said that he's happy he didn't sneeze either. Because if he had sneezed, he wouldn't have been around in 1963 to tell America about a dream that he had. Or he would not have been around to see the Civil Rights Bill passed if he had sneezed. And then he goes on to say that, and they were telling me, it doesn't matter now. It really doesn't matter what happens now. I left Atlanta. And as we got started on the plane this morning, there were 6 of us, and the pilot came over the public address system. "We are sorry for the delay. We have Dr. Martin Luther King on the plane. And to be sure that all the bags were checked and to be sure that nothing would go wrong on the plane, we had to check everything out carefully. And we have had the plane protected and guarded all night. And then I got to Memphis. And then they began to tell me about the threats on my life, suffering, what would happen to me from some of my sick white brothers. But I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. And it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. And I don't mind, like anybody. I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I looked over and I've seen the promised land. And I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And so I'm happy tonight, and I'm not worried about anything, and I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. The next day, the very next day, April the 4th, 1968, at the Lorraine Motel, downtown Memphis in room 306. Martin Luther King was scurrying around, ready to go to dinner with his good friend, the Reverend Billy Samuel Cowles and the Reverend Ralph Abernathy. And he asked the philosophical question of the day, "Where's my pretty necktie I like to wear? Where's my pretty tie?" Reverend Ralph Abernathy, his jail buddy, his friend said, "Martin, it's on the chair where I pressed it for you." And as soon as Dr. King tied his tie, there was a voice outside of 306 at the Lorraine Motel. It was the voice of the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who yelled up to 306, "Hey, Doc, Ben Branch is here." And Ben came to serenade you with his new horn. Ben came to pray, precious Lord, for you. Before Dr. King stepped out on that balcony, he told the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, I want Ben to play real pretty tonight. Then he looked to his left and told Reverend Billy Cowles, I just want to hear him play Precious Lord for me. The moment he stepped out on that balcony, he never heard one musical note that Ben Branch had prepared for him. He was shot with a 30.06 Game Master rifle. Rush, and the powerful bullet untied the knot that Dr. King had just tied. He lay on the balcony there in a blood-soaked shirt. Rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital, rushed to the ER room on a rickety old gurney. He was met with a medical team of neurosurgeons, pulmonary surgeons, thoracic surgeons. But the first words out of Dr. Rufus Brown and Dr. Taylor Gilliam's mouth was tracheotomy. 32 minutes, they tried to save Dr. King's life. Finally, Dr. Frederick G.O., a tall Sicilian American, said, he's gone. And had he lived, there's a possibility and a probability that Dr. King would have been paralyzed from the neck down and in a vegetative state. And that's not Dr. King. But before Dr. King died, he left each one of us this day. Each one of you who are hearing my weak voice today, he left a message for you. And he said, I want you to imagine that all of us are invited to hear his last sermon. But I want you to think about us being ushered into the Mason Temple, Church of God in Christ. And Dr. King looks up and said, welcome, Enterprise. I'm glad you could make it because I got a message for you. I've been listening to hear about the climate change on earth, but I want you to trust in the Lord and he'll direct your path. Come on, Enterprise, come a little closer. I got a message for you. I know about all of the police brutality from Minneapolis to Ferguson, but nonviolence is still the key to our survival. So Enterprise, let me give you my message. I want you to hear my message to you, Enterprise, on this day. Everybody can be great because everybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree in order to serve. You don't have to make your verb, your subject and your verb agree, Enterprise, in order to serve. You don't have to know about Plato and Aristotle in order to serve. All you need is a heart full of love, filled with grace. And let me close. Women played a vital part in the civil rights movement. They were there to help the icons along the way. And as one sociologist called women, the foot soldiers for justice. Joanne Robinson, professor of mine at Alabama State, who churned out 10,000 leaflets to let Montgomery know that the bus boycott was not ended. 4 women, Coretta Scott King, who told me that she knew she would marry, she would be secondary in Dr. King's life, and his social journey for justice would be first. And then there was Diane Nash, who trained John Lewis about the Freedom Rides in Nashville, Tennessee. And when Robert Kennedy asked her not to go, said, you know that some of you will be killed. She stood up and said, Mr. Attorney General, everybody sitting here tonight have signed their last will and testament. We expect some of us to die. And then there was a 4th lady that Adonis will tell you about now. Adonis. Can't hear you.
You're on mute.
Okay. All right.
Good morning, Enterprise.
Sorry about that. My name is Adonis Bozeman, for those of you guys who don't know, and I serve as the former recruiter for the best community college in Alabama, Enterprise State Community College. As my grandfather mentioned, I cannot acknowledge passing the torch without mentioning my grandmother, Miss Maggie Bozeman, a foot soldier for justice. My grandmother, Miss Maggie Bozeman, and her dear friend, Miss Julia Wilder, were falsely accused of voter fraud by an all-white jury in 1979.
We can't hear him.
Hello.
Okay.
Sorry
We can
about
hear you
that.
now. Yeah.
I do apologize. Good morning. My name is Adonis Bozeman, and I serve as the former recruiter for the best community college in Alabama, Enterprise State Community College. As my grandfather mentioned, I cannot acknowledge passing the torch without mentioning my grandmother, Miss Maggie Bozeman, a foot soldier for justice. My grandmother, Miss Maggie Bozeman, and her dear friend, Miss Julia Wilder, were falsely convicted of voter fraud by an all-white jury in 1979. Judge Jenkins denied probation, and armed deputies drove the two women off to Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama. Ms. Wilder, president of the Pickens County Voters League, and Ms. Bozeman, the president of the local branch of the NAACP, began urging elderly Blacks to vote by absentee ballot in a majority all-white county. The two women were charged by the highest conviction of any voter fraud in the state of Alabama. News spread throughout the nation. The Washington Post stated that the sentences are believed to be the stiffest ever given in the Alabama voter fraud case. Ebony Magazine stated in their article, Pickens County is still living in the Old South. 11 days after serving time, civil rights activists such as Dr. Joseph E. Laurie and Jerome Gray organized a 180-mile march from Carrollton, Alabama, the county seat, to Montgomery, Alabama, the state's capital. In response, Governor James negotiated a work release program and transferred the women to Tuskegee, Alabama, in which they were later released. I am blessed to have two grandparents that played a pivotal role to be advocates for civil rights. Their passing of the torch is burning inside of me and my family, as I now serve as the first African-American coordinator of admissions and recruitment for the Croft Institute at the University of Mississippi, the top international studies program in the nation. My grandparents' lives are just like our lives. Everyday people that wake up in the morning, make an honest living, and have the conscious ability to know what is right and what is wrong in the world we live in. To my generation, the TikTokers, the tech-savvy students, and the innovators, how can we keep this torch going? Well, the answer is very easy. Webster defines purpose as an intended or desired aim, end, goal. Students of Enterprise State and those who are zooming in, many of you are still trying to find your purpose in life, and that is okay. Some of you will find your purpose when you select your major or area of study so you can graduate college in order to serve to aspire and inspire the masses. Others will join the military after college to find their purpose to serve our country with honor. And others will find a particular workforce to serve in and become successful financially in that trade. Out of all those three examples, what word stood out to you the most, guys? Serve. As my grandfather mentioned, on February the 4th, 1968, just 2 months before he was assassinated, Dr. King delivers a sermon that will go down in history titled The Drum Major's Instinct. And King encouraged his congregation to seek greatness and do so through service and love. And I quote from his quotes. And this morning, the thing that I like about it, by giving that definition of greatness, it means that everybody can be great, Enterprise. Everybody, because everybody can serve. President Rogers, you don't have to have a college degree to serve. Vice President Dean, you don't have Dean Long, you don't have to make your subject and your verb agree to serve. Dean Mathis, you don't have to know Plato and Aristotle to serve. Stephen, you don't have to know Einstein's theory of relativity to serve. Dr. Thomas, you don't need to know the second theory of aerodynamics and physics to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love, and you, Enterprise State, and those who are listening can be that servant. The senseless killings of Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, and George Floyd, just to name a few, sparked a fire in our generation to serve and believe in what is right. Different races and cultures from all over the world took a stand to realize what the great James Baldwin once said: not everything is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. Let me say that one more time. Not everything is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. To my generation, we can be servants of change. We can be foot soldiers for justice, and we can keep that torch alive for many generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Good job. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bozeman, Mr. Clarence Bozeman, and thank you, Adonis Bozeman. I knew that we were in for a treat, and you guys proved me correct. Couple things I wanted to mention that I didn't say earlier. When I invited Mr. Clarence Bozeman and Adonis Bozeman to speak to us today, it was important to me to kind of feature both of them, because I know for so many of us, we don't have someone like Mr. Clarence Bozeman to share the stories and to share the knowledge with us. And so I'm so grateful for them today. You know, when I talked with Mr. Bozeman earlier this week, he talked about making sure that everyone in his family has the knowledge. He shares his information. He shares his knowledge with every person in his family. And I think that's something that's really, really special. And I think you can see that in Adonis. So thank you all for listening in. At this time, we are going to allow for questions. Margene Corcoran, she is our chairperson for the Diversity Committee. She has some questions that were submitted previously to the meeting. She's going to ask those questions. Most of your mics are muted, so if you would like to submit a question, please do so in the chat right now. Again, thank you so much, Mr. Clarence Bozeman. Thank you so much, Mr. Adonis Bozeman. I really, really, really enjoyed your presentation. And at this time, I'm going to pass it over to Margene.
Hi, good morning, guys. That was wonderful. I found myself tearing up a couple of times, which is not necessarily rare for me, but I really appreciate your presentation this morning. We had several questions sent in earlier. And I'm watching chat if you guys have any questions that you want to ask of the Bozemans. First, for Mr. Bozeman, the elder, a couple of questions that were sent in. First, did you meet any other civil rights leaders while driving for Dr. King? And if so, were there any lesser known leaders that you were inspired by?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yes, I did. I had a chance to meet Reverend Lowry and Reverend C.T. Vivian. Many times I would drive them over to Tuskegee. There was a court case in Tuskegee called Gomillion versus Lightfoot. And that case had to do with gerrymandering Tuskegee University out of the voting district. And so those three, King, Dr. King and Lowry and Reverend C.T. Vivian I drove them over to Tuskegee from Montgomery. And then there was Reverend Ralph Abernathy, who and his wife, Juanita. Yes, they were very prominent in and around Montgomery. And some of the lesser known was a guy by the name of Reverend James Lawson. Reverend James Lawson has a very interesting, he's a minister, a pacifist, and he was James Earl Ray personal minister. And when James Earl Ray was dying from cancer, he asked Reverend Lawson to attend his funeral. And that's another story we go into later. But yes, they were inspiring people.
Thank you. We have a question in chat from Bobby Montgomery, and it actually kind of goes in line with something that I jotted down and wanted to ask. So for both of you, now I have to scroll, sorry. Bobby says,
Really?
about the future specifically. moving forward with the movement. What do you think that looks like? And who do you look
Hey,
to
baby.
as a sort of successor to Dr. King in the civil rights movement?
Who is that question?
Either one of you.
I didn't hear the question. You broke up a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
We were asking specifically what you thought the future of the civil rights movement looked like. Who do you look to today as a sort of successor to Dr. King?
Well, AD, you go first. If you
Sure. Right now, currently, I feel like we do not have a prominent leader going forward in the civil rights movement. And I feel like that's what's one of the main key components of what's lacking in today's society. Another thing, as I mentioned in the speech, is that it's going to take our younger generation, us, to really step up to the plate in order to move forward with bringing that positive change and going in the right direction.
Well, that brings me, it's a great segue to another question.
let me ride piggyback on it very quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because of the change in African American demographics, we cannot have one leader now. We need a multiplicity of people who are interested in racial equality and justice for all. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful answer. That brings me to another that was sent in, and for Mr. Bozeman, the elder. Did you ever consider going into politics more heavily as a result?
Absolutely not. No.
What about you, Adonis? Do you have any political aspirations?
Not at all. I have not considered it.
Okay, fair enough. And I can't say I blame you. Were you ever, this is for Mr. Bozeman, the elder, was Dr. King always as mild-mannered as he is often portrayed to us in the media?
The times that I saw him on the weekends, yes, but I saw him get angry twice. And yeah, once at the Congregational Dexter and once at me. At Dexter, they had a funeral for the custodian who had been there for over 40 years, and he passed away, and very few people attended his funeral because many of the Dexter congregationists or congregants were professors, doctors, lawyers, etc. And I guess during the week they just couldn't make it to his funeral. And Dr. King was extremely angry that Sunday morning, and he preached about and the title of his sermon was "The Least of Us." And the time he got angry at me was that I was supposed to go pick him up at church, and we didn't have a place to go. I had delivered my passenger. So I stopped by the cafeteria at Alabama State. I had dinner and I fell asleep. He's waiting at the church for me to come pick him up to take him home, and I'm fast asleep. So I hear this rap on my dormitory door, and he's standing there, and he was livid. He said, "Mr. Bozeman, may I have my keys, please?" He jerked them and walked away. And I thought he was going to fire him, but he never brought the incident up again.
That's funny. Your daughter has a question for you, Mr. Bozeman.
Oh, Lord.
Good morning. How are you, everyone? Enterprise State. Thank you so kindly for having my dad and my son as your guest speakers. Great job, both of you. But Dad, yeah, I do have a question for you. Do you remember the first time you actually told me about your job while you were in college? Do you recall the first time I ever heard about it?
I think you were in DC at Howard.
Yes, you do remember.
Yeah,
yes.
I had never mentioned because I didn't think it was that important.
Yeah, exactly. I want to tell the story, and I don't think either Cody or AD even knew. Yes, I was a student at Howard University, and my dad made a surprise visit to me. He took me out to dinner, and we were having, college conversations, and he mentioned to me, he said, "Well, did your mother ever tell you that I drove for Dr. King?" And I said, "No." And she never told me. I did not realize what he had done until I was a student at Howard University in college. So throughout my formative years, no one mentioned that event to me. So, you know, when he told me, I was like, okay, that's good. True story, true story. So AD, I don't think you, and Cody, I don't think you guys ever knew that. And I wanted to piggyback as well with AD when he mentioned my mother, Maggie Bozeman. The march that led from Carrollton to Montgomery, I was a senior in high school and I participated. When the officers immediately took my mother and Mrs. Wilder to Wetumpka, to Julia Tutwiler Prison, a march was organized from Carrollton to Aliceville immediately. With that march and organization was Joseph Lowry, Joe Reed. So there were a lot of Alabama organizations, grassroots, that were participants. And I can honestly say that I was, it was a quite eventful.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think I have one or two others that were sent in early. I will come to you, Ms. Ball. Mr. Bozeman, did you ever feel at any time that your life was in danger while driving for Dr. King?
Not. The only thing is that I had this officer who was following me every Sunday morning on a motorcycle. And I got a ticket one time, and I told Dr. King, I said, Dr. King, I got this ticket. I said, but I don't know whether I ran a stop sign or what, allegedly. And he said, let's go to court. He said, give it to me. I gave him the ticket, but I never heard anything about it anymore. But I feared more for that officer than I did just driving his car. He had an old blue Pontiac that I would drive and everybody knew it. So I told him, I said, well, Doc, you need to get a new car because this one is falling apart. He said, I can't, because how would it look for me to have a brand new car 2 years after the bus boycott, and my ethics would be involved, and we know that. So yeah, the cop was the only one I was afraid of. And by the way, that policeman later on became chief of police in Montgomery.
Interesting. Adonis, can I ask you one more?
Please.
And this was sent in. So the writer said that your grandfather has, of course, a very interesting story. Have you felt pressure in your life to live up to a higher standard because of that?
That's a great question. I don't. I really take it as a humble grain of salt, and I use it as inspiration. I try really not to brag about it or boast about it at all, because I want to create my own legacy. And so that way I can continue and passing the torch. But I really, I'm really proud of my grandfather. We always joke and say I'm a chip off the old block, if you will. But I really want to create my own legacy so I can inspire others, just as my grandfather has inspired me and so many others that's in this chat.
Great, thank you. And we had a question from a viewer, Ms. Ball.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Hey, Adonis, nice to see you. And
hey,
Mr.
Mama.
Clarence, you remember me? You visited us one time at Youthville here in Carrollton. I got a question I never did find out. I'd like to know, how did you get to that you drove Mr. Martin Luther King? How did it all involve or elude?
How did I get the job? Is that what you?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was asked by the dean at my college in Montgomery he said he had received a letter from the church and they just needed a driver. And the dean said that he thought I would serve that purpose because he had been watching me and he thought that my behavior was, my behavior was pretty good. So, but he
I'm surprised.
Yeah. But I took the letter down to Dr. King, and after that he began to interview me. So it was a letter from Dexter Avenue Baptist Church to the college for somebody to come drive.
Oh, okay. And I got one more question, if I can. You also mentioned in your speech about the being the stress and all this, you be involved in it. It wasn't only Dr. Martin Luther King. I can imagine how much in stress you was to drive him to all those events.
You know, the only time that I got a feeling of anxiety is when we were on country roads near Demopolis in Marengo County, and we was trying to get back to 80, and where the highway was a little more public, or in the between Greensboro and Greenville. I was a little hesitant in those areas because they are rural areas, Uniontown, and that's the only time that I would feel. But once I got on 80 to get back to Montgomery, I was okay. But it was getting from the churches, and a lot of small churches, small rural churches, they did not record the sermons that Dr. King had given, and I wish that they had. But those are the times when I was just a little bit hesitant, and it was dark. They were very dark. Right. So,
well, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that those are all the questions that were sent in. So thank you, guys. I'll turn it back over to Cassie.
Margene.
Already.
What is that?
Not sure. Thank you, Margene. Thank you, Mr. Clarence Bozeman. Thank you, Mr. Adonis Bozeman. It has definitely been a treat. I had a few questions, but they have been answered by other people's questions. So I think we're all on the same page.
Well, we got time.
We got time. So does anyone else have any questions that they would like to ask?
You got a meeting, AD?
No, I'm good.
I'm good too. So let's go. Anybody else? Okay.
Well, I think there were, hold on. Let me make sure I got all the questions that were sent in. I felt like I did, but no, here's another one. Going back to before you got the job or as you were getting the job to drive for Dr. King, Mr. Bozeman, were you given any warnings at all, any specific guidelines about how you should behave as his driver?
Well, the only is that he asked me to be on time and to be courteous to my clients, and that if I had any problem whatsoever with anyone, to direct any questions to him or to Mr. Robert Nesbitt. So the point of the matter is that those are the only two things that he asked me to do, is to be courteous, be on time.
I had one question that just sort of popped up to me. You were speaking a good bit about, well, recently about how he was angry with you one time. You saw him angry 2 times. Did you ever feel like there was at any time a lack of hope?
Not at that time. See, I was a young man then, and growing up in Alabama, when I grew up, I witnessed the colored and the white signs, colored men, white men. I have been a party of racial discrimination in Gadsden and growing up in that era. My dad worked at the Republic Steel in Gadsden, but it was muscle jobs that most African Americans had. They were brawn, but not brain. So I had little hope then, but my saving grace was that we had teachers at Carver High School, all Black, who told us, and at Alabama State too, they told us this: we want you to get the best education you can, because hope is coming and you will be prepared for a better day. And you can only get that through education and love. And we will give you both. And that they did at Alabama State and at Carver High School. All of my Black teachers told me that I have hope is using knowledge through experience. And that's the way they taught us. And that's what prepared us for a better day than what we are seeing now.
Thank you. I think I definitely covered everything now. If anybody else has any questions. Oh, something just came in the chat. somebody is asking Zamia Scott, what were the most challenging moments in your life?
I think, I don't know what they mean during college or what, but I think that the most challenging thing that I have seen is that at Alabama State, we were demonstrating and we were going downtown. The whole campus was going downtown to integrate the restaurant at the Montgomery County Courthouse. And the streets were filled with kids going down. And at the top of South Jackson Street, the state troopers with their dogs stopped us. And we kept marching. And there was a white guy with a baseball bat. His name was Sonny Kyle Livingston. Walked across the street and hit a lady, a black lady, and split her head with a baseball bat and she fell almost at my feet. And it was almost at St. Margaret's Hospital. But the thing of it, that really bothered me. And to see the dogs snarling at us and keeping us, that bothered me. And it has a tendency to, so that was a dark time in me. And to see the changes in Alabama now is just noteworthy to be seen. It is really remarkable to see the changes that have been made. We still got a long ways to go, but we have seen remarkable changes in Alabama since my day.
That makes me feel good to hear you say, and I'm sure I'm speaking for most of the group. So again, I thank you, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dean Mathis. Thank you guys very much.
You're welcome.
Marjane, I just have one quick question. You know, we're from the same hometown, so I know a little bit about where you're from. How did you end up at Alabama State? What was it like growing up in Gadsden and then transitioning to Alabama State? I know, I know what the community is like there, so there's not a lot of people that actually make it out of the town. So how did that happen?
Well, I had to go to the Army because I didn't have money to go to college. So when I got out, I was on the GI Bill. So I worked 1 year at Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company in East Gadsden, and I said, I can't do this, and it's not for me. So my mother told me that I had two choices. I had to go to school or find another job. So I chose. I have a lot of friends. My football coach at Carver was Alabama State. Most of my people who influenced me were Alabama State. And I had one good friend named William Gary who told my mother he doesn't need to go any place but Alabama State. He doesn't need to go to A&M, Tuskegee, anywhere. You send there. Now, what my mother knew about college, you could put them a leak and thimble. But she said that since Gary said it, you go. So that's the way I ended up at Alabama State.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Bozeman. This has been a treat. We really, really appreciate you. And of course, I'm going to be reaching out. I've already been to a couple of your sessions already, and I'm going to continue to participate as long as you're having these virtual Zoom sessions. You're such an interesting person, and you have such an amazing story. So thank you very much. Adonis, I don't see you, but I want you to know that we do miss you. I saw it in the chat where you said you miss us. We miss you too. And I'm so thankful for you. And most of all, I'm happy that you were able to help me coordinate this and make this happen for our college. I really appreciate you.
It was my pleasure. And thank you again. And I do miss you guys. And I appreciate just being able to have the opportunity to speak to you guys. And I think great, with what's been going on with the pandemic and COVID, one of the great benefits, and me and my grandfather touched on this, was just having the benefits of Zoom, so people can Zoom in not only at Enterprise but really all over the nation. So we have, mentioning the first beginning, have people from Arizona Zoom in, from Cleveland, my Cleveland family, all parts of Alabama, Tennessee, and so on. So and also some students from University of Mississippi I was able to hop on. So a great benefit of this Zoom chat was very beneficial to us.
And Steve Masters, I just want to thank the audience for their participation. And I want to thank them for taking the time out of their busy schedule just to hear Adonis and me. We appreciate them and we love them. So
definitely,
could you please convey our greetings and felicitations or thanks to them for us?
On behalf,
Thank you, Colin James.
sorry, I was muted, didn't realize it. On behalf of the ESCC Diversity Committee, we thank everyone for participating. I hope you all have a wonderful day.
All
All right.
right.
Have a good one.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.